Hey guys, getting ready to start the last lecture of the unit on Revolutionary Road. And I guess it's a weird thing to say, hope you enjoyed the book or I hope you liked it, because it is really just a devastating ending. But just from the feedback I was getting in class and just seeing how much you guys are talking about it, you've all been talking about it on Moodle, with just some really great posts. Seems like you've all connected with it, at least. So maybe like or enjoyed is the wrong word, but certainly you've seen just how powerful the book it is, and hopefully you've seen why. So we'll start with 7, then just all the way through. I mentioned a little bit of this in the last set of lectures. Hopefully this lecture goes smooth and I can just upload one long clip. But chapter 7 is all April's. We've seen basically things from Frank's point of view in the previous chapter and many of the other chapters, but at least the previous chapter. And then we sort of shift to see the same scene play out, only it's from April's point of view. And that's at the point where it says April Johnson Wheeler. So we're bringing who she was before she was married and who she is now together here. At various times in the book, we've seen Yates referred to her as April Johnson or April Wheeler. And her final moments with Frank are an act of sorts. So this sort of brings us back to the beginning of the book with her on stage, although this obviously is real life. And it's interesting to me how strong she is initially with Frank as he leaves, hugs. She keeps her face even after he's gone. She's kissed him goodbye. Smile continues when she was back in the kitchen. And then slowly it starts to break. It starts to crack. Tears break, run down her cheeks as fast as she could wipe them away. This again mirrors her performance in the Petrified Forest at the beginning of the book. However, I would make the argument, or you guys maybe can make the argument and talk about the argument, that in that case it was her sort of having a breakdown and feeling helpless and sad. Now in this case, it ends tragically, but I see April as a stronger character, again, to a tragic end. At the end of the book here, it feels like, I mean, she gains strength in these final moments. And at the very least, we get to see it from her point of view, which is very important. So she turns on the radio, calm the nerves, gets everything clean. Then she calls Millie Campbell. And we see it from her end, just the phone call from her end. We hear, she's still not feeling well. Do you mind keeping the kids one day longer? And then Millie suggests, let me get the kids to come talk to you. And April's like, no. She waves it off. She's smoking a cigarette. She's like, no, I can't talk to them. And she finally gets the phone back to the cradle, and that's when she breaks down. She can't talk to the kids right now because it may break the spirit of what she's decided to do. So she cries, she smokes another cigarette. Afterwards, she washed her face, brushed her teeth. And then she thinks about something one of her aunts, Aunt Claire, had told her. Have you thought it through, April? Never undertake to do a thing until you've thought it through, then do the best you can. So then she goes through all these orderly steps, straightens the house, cleans up this mess she'd made last night. We'll find out what that mess is. It's these ashes in a garbage can, in a waste paper basket. And these old, I'm sorry, the ashes are later, but she sees ashes from the cigarettes. But she has all these wadded up papers of this letter that she was going to write to Frank. And just go back on something I said in the last lecture. I think it's very important to be clear that the whole Aunt Claire thing kind of clarifies this even more. So have you thought it through? Never do something until you think it all the way through. April hasn't decided to kill herself. This is not a suicide. April has decided to do something that she knows very well could kill her despite that. And I think that's very important to note. I've had a few responses in the past that, you know, April committed suicide, and that's not the case at all. Now, you could, you know, this is where you miss a sort of a back and forth. Because I have had, you know, in a lecture, some back and forth. Well, what's sort of splitting hairs? And I don't think that's the case. And if it is splitting hairs, that's what art is about. It's about being able to do that and show these sort of maybe things that seem very similar, just in general, as vastly different. Because in no way is April's death like, I don't know. This is a horrible example just from something we've already read, like Norman Bowker's death and things they carry. So maybe it's splitting hairs. I don't think it is. But even if you say it's splitting hairs, it still shows you just the power of literature because it's so vastly different. But she's not killing herself. She's decided to give herself an induce a miscarriage at a very more dangerous time than it would have been. So we go through these letters. This is great in terms of connecting back to stuff we've read so far. Also, just the idea of writing, what it means to tell the truth, be honest. And she lays all this down here. And the first letter she pulls up that she's thrown away is brutal. Calls him a coward, self-delusion. She laughed, all this stuff. She didn't read the rest because she knew it wasn't worth reading. It was weak with hate, like all the abortive letters on the other crumpled papers. All of them would have had to be burned. Now, first question, and I'll post this in the Moodle forum, is why did she burn the other letters? And you know, maybe it'll sort of answer this as I talk my way through this and talk too much like Frank. But think about why she decided to burn the letters. Anyway, she finally stopped trying to write the letter. She'd gone in and seen him, so now we know for a fact it wasn't a dream that Frank saw. And this was the point in the night where she'd been angry. She'd written these letters. She'd thrown them all away. And she sits down and she comforts him. And she has this realization that, you know, she's right. She doesn't love him. But at the same time, she doesn't hate him. How could anyone hate Frank? He was, well, Frank. Rather just, I mean, I don't even know if we've mentioned how great a name that is for Frank. And many of you have talked about how one of Frank's big problems is that he doesn't know who he is because he's constantly changing either for himself, his own sort of psychology, or for other people, how other people want him to be. He doesn't really know who he is. And frank is that, you know, it's sort of an antiquated phrase, like, be frank with me. It means, like, be straight, be honest. And that's something we really get out of Frank, even though we get a lot of words out of him. But she admits she can't hate him. And that's sort of a nuance there that you don't expect. But she, you know, she doesn't hate him, but she doesn't love him. Anyway, that's when she thought it through. She hadn't been wrong or dishonest for her to say no this morning when he asked if she hated him anymore than been wrong or dishonest to serve the elaborate breakfast. So she's all about honesty at this point. And that's why when he asked, do you hate me? She's like, I don't, because she doesn't. And then we get this passage. The only real mistake, the only wrong and dishonest thing was to ever have seen him as anything more than the boy you just met at a party, boy who just danced with you and made you laugh and walked you home afterwards and talking about himself all the way. She fell for it and she built it up, and here we are. And in his head, he built it up too. He built a foundation on it, on these things, these compliments she gave him. And the fact that she's ever saw it as anything more than that is the problem. For a month or two, just for fun, it might be all right to play a game like that. But all these years, the whole thing has been an act. The whole thing has been a play. And a tough one at that. And eventually you just go along with it until he was saying, I love you. And she was saying, really, I mean it. You're the most interesting person I've ever met. What a subtle, treacherous thing it was to let yourself go that way. Because once you'd started, it was terribly difficult to stop. Soon you were saying, I'm sorry, of course you're right. And whatever you think is best. And you're the most wonderful and valuable thing in this world. A man. And the next thing you know, honesty, all truth was far away and glimmering, as hopelessly unattainable as the world of the golden people. Then you were working at life the way the Laurel players worked at the Petrified Forest, the way Steve Kovac worked at his drums, earnest and sloppy and full of pretension and all wrong. You said yes when you meant no. You said we've got to be in this thing together when you meant the very opposite. Then you were breathing gasoline as if it were flowers and abandoning yourself to a delirium of love under the weight of a clumsy, grunting, red-faced man you didn't even like, Ship Campbell. And then you're in the darkness and you didn't know where you really were. And she says, how can anyone else be blamed for that? She's putting the blame on herself. for sort of going down that wormhole of, the appeasement of social manners, I guess. This is what you're supposed to do. You fall in love. Eventually, you say yes. She says yes. House, small house, kids, bigger house, jobs, all these things, which can work, but it's not going to work because it's a mathematical equation. For the same reason, it could be very, very wrong and not work. But because we're sort of caught in that loop of conformity and kind of seeing things through the lens of what everybody else my age is doing. It's still something. I mean, this is 1955, this book, but you still see that now. And I guess it also works sort of generationally speaking. It's kind of interesting. I remember, I think it was so weird for me whenever I was whenever I was in college or whatever, in my 20s, and I was thinking about the age my parents were at that time. And they'd already had me by that point, and I was very young. And many people my age weren't like that, because it's a generational thing. It's like, what are we supposed to be doing? Are we supposed to be jumping in the fucking fountain like friends or whatever? That's what we're doing, generationally speaking. But at the same time, there could be a pressure sort of within your group, within your age range, and this is where you should be now, this, and this. And I think April is Exhibit A, and why that could be problematic. Anyway, she goes outside to burn the letters. She hears voices in the distance. The voices serve as a trigger for a memory, and this is really the only time we get a memory from April's point of view. It's of her playing with other children, and April's father is coming to visit, and she's excited because he's going to eat dinner with him. He's going to spend the night. She's a little kid at this point. And then she finds out he's not going to stay the night. And then she finds out that he's not even going to eat dinner with them. He's just it's a pop-in, 15-minute pop-in. And again, this is, her mom and dad are who she really loves, and she never sees them. Then the dad gives her something as if he's gotten her a gift. And I don't know how many of you noticed this, but it's not really a gift at all. It's just a little trinket that came on the cap of the particular type of booze he drank at the time. It'd be like saving the top of a Maker's Mark bottle or something like that. But in this case, it's a little horse, and he gives it to her, and that's it. And this takes her back to the now. And you gotta wonder why she goes back to that memory. Maybe that could be another question or something you could bring up on the Moodle page as to why that memory? Why now? I mean, I think there's some connection to like maybe sort of forcing herself into doing what she's going to do. Anyway, she burns the stuff, puts the waste paper basket back, and then she writes a letter. And the letter is clear, honest, to the point. It goes back to the whole idea that really the last harsh thing Frank said to her the night before during the fight was, "I wish you'd done it. I wish you'd gotten it or induced the miscarriage." She says, "Dear Frank, whatever happens, please don't blame yourself." She almost adds, "I love you," because she's so used to it. She calls it an insidious habit, but she's honest. She wants to be honest, so she just writes April. You wonder if he even knows. Now, it's very interesting, because we've had a character in a book write "Love Martha," even though Jimmy Cross knew love didn't mean that. Here we have April removing it completely because she wants to be honest in these final moments, what could be final moments. Then we have this very clinical description of how she goes about, inducing the miscarriage. It was 9:30, turned off the heat, she sterilized the bulb. She needed no more advice. At this point, we see Aunt Claire talking to her in her head, but even then, April's going to do this on her own. She is Tim O'Brien out there on that boat on the Rainy River. She's been put in a position where she can do something, take morals out of it, but she is in a position where she can do something she has autonomy with and make this decision to do it. It's a tragic one, it becomes a tragic one. And she realizes, though, that if you ever really want to do something honest, something true, it always had to be a thing that you had to do alone. Now, you could really dive into that with the rest of the book because, you know, many of the lies or the acting in the book, much of the acting and the lies in the book come up when other people are around because you're trying to put on a show. I'm not sure Frank has the ability, at least at this point, I'm not sure he has the ability to be honest, completely honest, even if he's doing something alone, because in his head, he's always like sort of creating these narratives. Although eventually I think by the time the book's over, he does. Nevertheless, Yates allows April this dignity in this moment. He shuts the door, and then what happens, happens. Now, those of you who've seen the movie version of this, or those of you who haven't, I don't think it works. I think it fails because I don't think this is filmable. I don't think it's filmable because over half the book is the friction. What gives the book circulation. A lot of the circulation is the friction between how the characters are thinking about they look, their appearances, their own stories versus how it plays out on the screen. You can't do that unless you have just horrible voiceover, which you don't want to rely on. I think the actors are great. I think certain scenes work simply because they're really, really well written scenes by Richard Yates. But I do want to point out two instances where the movie did some things that I think speak to the antithesis of what this book is about. And they probably don't even realize it. The first one was whenever this happens with April, she prepares, and then after she's done the act and she's waiting for it to take, she walks back out into the living room and she looks out the picture window, and you can just see this, this director, even the screenwriter, go, oh, this is this beautiful symbolic moment where she stands and she looks out that window that he's given us so much, and then she starts bleeding onto the carpet. And that's like the symbol, whatever. It's trashy. It was like a trashy way of like sort of trying to wring emotion out of you, which Yates never does in this book. And it ruins that last moment that she had alone in the book. Like we actually see her, and I just didn't dig it. The other scene I think truly, ironically, actually verifies something that was talked about in this book quite a bit with John Givings and Frank Wheeler, and I'll talk about that when we get to it. Anyway, chapter 8, Millie Campbell had just completed her housework, and she said afterwards, now again, we know afterwards is when Millie Campbell is reconstituting the story as a way of being able to tell it in part for therapy, but it does seem like she becomes a little happier to tell it as times go on. At least that's what Shep thinks. And we see her tell it later. But later on, she always had a very definite sense of foreboding before she heard the ambulance. Now, I'm going to call bullshit because I think most of the time, if not all the time, what that very definite sense of foreboding is our memory lying to us, or our memory trying to reconcile that which we can't control. Like, oh, I felt something was wrong. And you think you felt that way just because of the difference between happening truth and story truth, like we've talked about with Tim O'Brien. Maybe, 0.0001% of you out there have, ESP, which is good because right now we don't have any ESP in, but maybe you can read, mind, things are going to happen, but probably not. Anyway, but it's another example of a character trying to control the chaos with their own narrative when that chaos can't be controlled. Anyway, Miss Givings calls her, says something's going on with the Wheelers, so Millie calls Shep. Shep is he's still lovesick with what had happened at the log cabin like a week ago, and he's thinking about to himself how stupid he feels. I think he's called April on the phone a few times. He'd only seen her once yesterday when she brought the kids over to his house. He'd hidden trembling in the bedroom and peeked through the curtains. Gets the phone call. Then he goes and gets Frank, pulls Frank out of his meeting. Remember the important meeting that he has. And for a moment, things feel like, I don't know, there's some sort of comfort in the fact that they knew what they had to do. They had to get to the hospital. Black and white, clear as day. In a book full of like all these gray areas and mud, really, it was nice to see, nice for them to have this sort of moment where, you may hear dogs in the background. Sorry. This moment where they just knew they had to do this one thing. Anyway, they get to, they drive, they get to the hospital, asked to go in, so it's just, you know, chaos. And then finally, Wheeler gets taken away for a private talk. Frank gets taken away for a private talk. At this point, we stick with Shep. This chapter is really nice in that it jumps around from the characters. We get to go with sort of all the characters play a part in this last chapter, in this next last chapter. And there's this wonderful moment where he's in the hospital, and he convinces himself that April's okay because life is going on surrounding him. There's a janitor pushing a mop. There's a radio. I didn't even think about that now, like hospitals now. I mean, how could some young 30-year-old healthy woman, we know because of what she's done, but in Shep's mind, like, and we think this ourselves too when tragedy occurs. How can some healthy, 30-year-old woman be dying just down the hall whenever we've got reruns of The Office on here, and you've got this great food in the lobby? How can anybody die in a place? How can anything bad be happening in a place that has chicken salad chick in the cafeteria? And it just looks so great, and it's clean and all this stuff, and that's it. Yeah. In his head, this is a place where babies were born, and where simple run-of-the-mill miscarriages were cleaned up in a jiffy. It's a place where you waited and worried until you made sure everything was all right, and you walked out and had a drink and went home. I've always said you should be able to drink at the hospital, but I don't know if that idea is ever going to get passed. Anyway, he sits down, he looks at a magazine. Again, how can anything bad be happening in the hospital waiting room? You're sitting there looking at magazines, about, Tom Hanks turning 60 or whatever. I guess bad example with Tom Hanks, although I hear he's doing better. But anyway, so Frank comes back out. He tells Shep, I didn't understand half of what he said. So there was a lot of blood before the ambulance came. They're trying to stop it. She's unconscious. How about sitting down a minute, Frank? That's what he said too. He says, why do I want to sit down? Okay,